Welcome to Mushroom Wonderland.
Today we are going on a journey into the Pacific Northwest. Into the forests, the markets, the kitchens, and the minds of mushroom lovers. To learn what a mushroom actually is. To discover the mysteries of fungi. How a mushroom reproduces. The many beautiful types of mushrooms that grow in the forests of the Northwest. The many uses for mushrooms over thousands of years, from ancient tribes to the modern-day forager, as we discover mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest. Mushrooms are as old and as constant in these forests as the land itself. Mushrooms are so unique that they have their own kingdom separate from plants and animals. They are beautiful, mysterious, and can even be deadly if misidentified. There are over 2,000 distinct species of mushrooms growing in the Pacific Northwest of all shapes and sizes, each with unique identification characteristics. There is still a bad stigma around the dangers of mushrooms, with a lot of misunderstanding surrounding it. Mushrooms can be eaten, used as medicine, used as dye for clothing, for recreation and art. Today we are just taking a small look into mushrooms and how humans use them. We hope to shed some light on our forest friends today and help you to discover mushrooms in all of their beauty. This is a mushroom. Well, it's what we most often think of when we hear the word mushroom. It is the fruit of what we call the mycelium. The mycelium is an underground network of fibers that make up the body of the fungus. Imagine if the mycelium was an apple tree and the mushroom is the apple. Now let's go over the parts of this mushroom. There is the cap or pileus. There is the stem or stipe. And this particular mushroom has gills under there. This is a very basic overview of a mushroom. You can look up more detailed descriptions if you wish. Now back to our mushroom. A mushroom reproduces by means of a spore, like an airborne seed, if you will. When the spore lands in the perfect conditions, it can reproduce. The mycelium grows underground. Then, when it is time to fruit, a mushroom grows to repeat this cycle. And if a human is lucky enough to come upon it during its relatively short lifespan, it might find its way into the dinner pot. There are gilled mushrooms, veined mushrooms, pored mushrooms or boletes. There is the tooth fungi, and polypores or shelf fungi. There is the puffball family, and the coral mushrooms. All of these grow here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And today, we are going to learn about a few popular types of local mushrooms that you can learn to forage for your of the mushrooms pictured in this film were found in the Pacific Northwest. We live in one of the most diverse regions in the world for fungi, so get out there and get picking. Mushrooms love the rain. That's why the Pacific Northwest is one of the most diverse places in the world for mushrooms. Most mushrooms here fruit in the autumn. After a long dry summer, the first of the fall rains begin. The forest begins to awaken. The mycelium is stimulated by the moisture. And when carbon dioxide levels, temperature, light, moisture, and humidity are ideal, the mycelium begins to produce fruit. Mushrooms need decay to grow, and just the right amount of nutrients to fruit. But mushrooms haven't always had such a savory reputation. In ancient Egypt, mushrooms were regarded as plants of immorality and reserved for royalty only. Common folks were even forbidden to pick them. Ancient Romans called mushrooms the food of the gods. Caesar Claudius, Roman emperor from 41 to 54 AD, was poisoned with the help of his wife conspiring with a poison maker.
I think most of us grew up with some authority figure telling us that we should avoid mushrooms. To a certain extent, I get that. When you have a 5-year-old child and you need to quickly keep them away from putting random objects in their mouth, telling them that mushrooms, those things growing out of the ground or out of that tree, are poisonous and dangerous and you should not eat them, that's not the craziest bit of simple black and white advice to give to a child.
I have found what is the Amanita Phalloides, or the death cap. This mushroom is responsible for 90% of all mushroom deaths. It doesn't grow on native trees around here. It's always from imported European hardwoods. This is Amanita Phalloides, or the death cap mushroom. This mushroom is responsible for most of the deaths associated with mushroom poisoning. If you look right here is the sac-like vulva that it was in. They say that it actually tastes really delicious.
We've been able to interview people, not myself, but mycologists have, who have eaten those mushrooms. And they all agree that those deadly amanitas are some of the best tasting mushrooms they've ever eaten. So the flavor of a mushroom doesn't mean it's safe.
There are stories of ancient philosophers claiming that the safe mushrooms to eat were red ones and white ones and ones that looked like Romans' priests' hats. All of this was incorrect and caused a lot of misunderstanding, sickness, death, and overall mistrust of mushrooms. A Roman philosopher put in his work that mushrooms should be avoided altogether. This statement had an impact that would persevere for centuries. He also claimed that mushrooms could cure ulcers, cure dog bites, and could remove freckles from women's faces. Simon Cyrenius claimed that mushrooms caused intestinal colic and that mushrooms should be avoided. Another ancient scholar, Claudius Galenus, claimed that poisonous mushrooms grew near rusted metal, rotting clothes, poisonous beasts' dens, and excrement from humans. He was also advised to eat as few mushrooms as possible to stay in good health. In the United States today, there are over 500 poisonous plants and only 250 significantly poisonous mushrooms. Yet people don't hesitate to go picking wild blackberries, simply because they know how to identify them. Mushrooms should be no different. Overcoming fear of wild mushrooms is a matter of education and awareness and is open to all who are willing to understand.
No, I think the fungophobia is way overblown. Anyone who is really interested in eating mushrooms safely, join a mycological society. They're full of people like myself who will say, well, don't eat that one, but this one's good.
Hi, I'm David Ansley, and I'm a member of the Kitsap Peninsula Mycological Society. I've been picking mushrooms since I was a kid. I grew up in the woods on the side of Issaquah. One of our friends showed us where to find morels around the base of cottonwood trees around Oyster. That turned out to be my introduction to collecting wild mushrooms.
My name is Aaron Hilliard. I'm a member of the Kitsap Peninsula Mycological Society. I've been picking mushrooms for over 30 years here in the Pacific Northwest. When I was 8 years old, my grandma got me into mushroom picking. She'd take me out in the forest across from her house, and we would just pick mushrooms and take them back to her place to bring out her old field guides and try to identify what mushrooms we found.
It's funny how everyone's first time in the woods, they point at almost everything and say, is that edible? Out of thousands of mushrooms in the Northwest woods, somebody has already tried them, right? You don't have to re-sample every mushroom in the woods and see how it tastes. We already know which ones are pretty good. They're really easy to identify, pretty darn easy to learn so that you can safely pick edible mushrooms in the Northwest. My advice is pick a mushroom that looks interesting, that you're pretty sure you can identify it, and go out and find it, and then go find some more of it, and then go find some more of it. And once you've got that mushroom mastered, pick another one and go looking for that mushroom. And one by one, work your way through the list. I would not go crazy. I would focus mushroom by mushroom on learning which ones are out there, what they look like, where you're likely to find them. And once you've got it nailed, move on to the next. What I like to talk about is how to think like a mushroom. And by that I mean, what does a mushroom want to eat? Where does a mushroom want to live? What's a mushroom want to do with its life? Because that gives us a lot of clues as to what you're going to find, when you're going to find it, where you're going to find it. And we have thousands of mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest. Most of them pop up sometime in the fall. But every one of them is just the fruit of a fungus that is growing and doing something there in the forest. A fungus can't make its own food like a plant does. It doesn't photosynthesize. What it does is it just cozies up to another plant or animal or debris in the soil and absorbs it. When you step into the woods in the Northwest in the fall, you're surrounded, whether you know it or not, you're surrounded by mushroom fungus mycelium, the thin threads of fungus that permeate the ground, the plants, the trees that are periodically giving birth to mushrooms. If you're in the woods and you're standing in a grove of fir or hemlock, underneath your feet is this vast skirt-like spread of mycelium, just a few inches down there. You can't see it, but it's living there, has been living there its whole life in concert with those trees. And they've got a sweet deal between the two of them. The fungus is extending the reach of that tree's roots. It's grabbing extra water and minerals that are just beyond the reach of the roots. And it's wrapped around the roots and it's feeding water and minerals into the roots, into the tree. And the tree, in return, sends carbohydrates out to the fungus, and that's what the fungus uses for food. And the tree can't live without the fungus, and the fungus can't live without the tree. So for instance, one of the mushrooms that we pick in the fall has that symbiotic relationship with the conifers around here, and that's the chanterelle. Chanterelles are always found in medium-aged to older-aged forests of fir and hemlock, and occasionally spruce, occasionally pine. You won't find them next to hardwood trees like alders or maples or willows or something like that. They've just worked out this deal with some of the conifers.
So when I'm hunting for chanterelles in the Pacific Northwest, I'm looking in a coniferous forest like this. You can see it's all fir and hemlock up here. Black huckleberry, salal leaves, moss on the ground. Look for these identifiers. That's the first thing you have to look for when you're going out to hunt chanterelles, that you're in the right kind of forest. And if you look right down here, we have a good example of a chanterelle, of a golden chanterelle, or a Turbinellis formosus. This is the golden chanterelle. It's a young button. There's the Chanterelle. We're gonna pluck this one out so you can see the stem and everything. Beautiful little Chanterelle. You can see that the veins kind of don't really stop in a straight line. They're very irregular. This is indicative of a Chanterelle. Sometimes these veins run all the way down the stipe, and but they're pretty easy to identify because of their vein pattern.
The lobster mushroom, it's a strange one, but where you find it is going to be near one of those trees because it's part of a relationship with those trees. So a lot of the mushrooms that we find in the woods in the fall, they're the ones that are happily working out this relationship with their trees.
We're going into this forest quite a ways off the beaten path in search of lobster mushrooms. This is Hypomices Lactoflorum. It's a parasite that actually grows on the Russella brevipees. You can see how lobster will look like this, right? This is a big one. We're about 300 feet from sea level. Conifer forest, a big Doug fir. A lot of black huckleberry. If you look at this ground cover, just a lot of this kind of moss right here in the middle of the game trail. It's real bright orange. There's a lobster peeking out at me. That's a freaking lobster mushroom. Holy crap.
Now, another category entirely of mushrooms, some of which we pick, are the ones that aren't supporting the tree, they're killing the tree. For instance, if you're walking through the woods and on maybe a dying tree or sort of a diseased-looking tree, you see this flash of orange shelf-like things hanging off of the tree. You can see it from 100 yards away. That's the chicken of the woods. It's the fruit of a fungus that is slowly killing that standing tree. That's a kind of mushroom that's from a fungus that is just busy chewing away at the nutrients inside that piece of wood.
Let's see if we can spot us a delectable chicken of the wood. We're looking for downed logs, so I'm in a section of woods where there's a lot of logs down, a lot of moss on everything. The chicken of the woods is just so thick and so meaty. It just shelves and shelves and shelves. It's really beautiful.
The Red Belted Conch. It's another kind of shelf mushroom. It's the one that you have seen whether you realize it or not. The Red Belted Conch is most likely the most common mushroom to be encountered in the Northwest woods. They may last for decades. The thing about hunting for mushrooms in the woods in the fall is that on any given day, you may or may not find the mushroom you're looking for where you found it last week. The mycelium has to decide when is the perfect time to reproduce, when is the perfect time to send some spores out into the world that year to try to make more babies. They operate off of formulas known only to them, but it obviously involves heat and involves moisture. I swear every week somewhere in the woods, some mushroom has decided, okay, now is the time to pop up. You know, another species of mushrooms that's very valued by collectors and hunters are the Bolitas. The Bolitas include some very tasty examples like the Porcini, which are also one of these symbiotic relationship fungi, again found in and around conifers in the Northwest.
If you look right here, what we got is a baby Porcini, a Porcini mushroom. How beautiful is that little guy? This is a Porcini mushroom. These mushrooms are one of the earliest ones to come out in the season. They're so delicious. If you look They're growing under a little mixture of salal and black huckleberry. There's some pine needles from some pine trees right here, as well as there's fir trees right above it.
One of my favorite mushrooms is the cauliflower mushroom, and I'm not the only one who thinks it's a favorite. One reason is it's so dang hard to find. It's like a unicorn. You can't really go hunting for a cauliflower mushroom. Really, you just find them by accident when you're looking for something else. They're usually tasty, has a terrific texture, and it's usually found nestled up against the base of an old stump or a dying tree. It's growing off of mycelium that's busy chewing away at that old tree or stump. And if you find one, I highly recommend that one as a treasure to bring back from the woods. I am a secret fan of the shrimp Russella. Tastes almost like French onion soup when you get it all cooked up. Don't tell anybody, because everybody will want it now.
David was talking about his love for the shrimp Russella. There's a little bit bigger of one, and here is a full-grown adult one. This is the shrimp Russella. You can see how it's got this rosy color on the stem, also indicative of the shrimp Russella. Another thing you can do is actually taste a little piece of the cap, and if it has a peppery taste, don't eat it. Got some pine needles in there. No peppery taste. Russella Zarampolina, the shrimp Russella.
So the trick to thinking like a mushroom is to think about what kind of environment does a particular mushroom want? What kind of moisture level does it want? What kind of heat does it want? What kind of pace is it on? Does it pop up typically in July or August or September or December? They all have a different pattern. If it's been really bone dry for the past month, you're not going to find very much in the woods. But if it starts raining really hard, give it 5 or 6 days and then go out to your favorite spot and things will have started popping up. I'm convinced that it makes no difference whatsoever to the fate of the fungus underneath the ground, because after all, it's like saying, gee, if you pick that apple, that might hurt the apple tree. Well, no. The apple tree is kind of grateful that you picked the apple because it's going to spread the seeds even farther than it might otherwise. I'm sure a fungus thinks similarly. Exactly how many little strands of mycelium you pull up along the way, I don't really think matters. The first thing is just to remember, it's crazy easy to get lost in the woods around here. When you're hunting for mushrooms, you're doing something different. You've got your head down and you're marching around trees, and then you're marching to the next bush, and then you're marching under a dead tree and up and around that stump. And unless you've got really clear hints as to the topography or where the sun is, a typical northwest cloudy October day, you lose all sense of direction. So you need other sources to keep yourself aware of where you are. One of them is just bring a compass. Another one is have a good sense from a map, a printed map, not necessarily one on your phone that's going to die with your battery, of where you're going, what the boundaries are, like roads or trails. So let's say you get lost. You've yelled, there's no sound. You look around and you've lost your bearings. You don't know which way is up. Stay there. Stop moving. Get out in the open or something. Don't guess. Because if you're lost, your friends are looking for you now. And the best thing you can do for them is stay put. It happens all too easily around here. And you just have to keep your wits and sit down and think about, okay, where was I? Where should everyone be? We'll get reunited. And you usually do. It is amazing to me what a huge variety of types of mushrooms, shapes of mushrooms, can be found really quite close to each other in similar habitat. They seem not to compete with each other too heavily. They seem to have found peaceful coexistence in their little patches of the woods.
I'm Lowell Dietz. We are on at the Dietz Mushroom Farm in Sequim. I am a lifetime member of the Kitsap Peninsula Mycological Society. When I came out to the West Coast, I joined the Mycological Society, and that just opened up a world of mushrooms for me. I've been involved in that club for over 30 years. When I first started hunting mushrooms, I was amazed to find these flavors that I had never tasted before. And one of the old timers said, oh, all these wild mushrooms have a unique flavor. So I started picking and hunting, and I picked morels and chanterelles, and occasionally I'd find a matsutake, I'd find the Bolitas cascadiensis. We started coming up with recipes to use these, and oh, they were so wonderful, but I was always out of mushrooms. Seems like before chanterelle season came, my chanterelles were all gone, and before morel season came, they were all gone. And I learned how to cultivate mushrooms. And the first thing we cultivated, this is a pink oyster mushroom, Pleurotus de Jamor. And that mushroom kind of smells like fish, tastes like seafood. So kind of a tough, chewy mushroom, but it's really easy to grow. It's about like growing dandelions in your lawn. Now this is my favorite mushroom for cultivation. This is a blue cap oyster mushroom. This is a good mushroom for this time because this mushroom, if it's seethed in water between 160 and 180 degrees, it has an enzyme that we humans use to fight bacteria and viruses. So it can be a medicinal mushroom if it's processed that way. Most people cook it over 180 and that enzyme evaporates off. But if you want to use it medicinally, it can be. It's probably my best tasting mushroom because it runs 20% or higher protein. The mycelium in the bag will run 30% protein if you want to use it for cattle or goat feed. I sell mushrooms to restaurants here in Sequim. My limit is 1 mile if the restaurant's within 1 mile of this grow room. I cannot supply the mushrooms within 1 mile of where I'm standing. I could grow 10 times as many mushrooms as I do and sell them. These I sell for $20 a kilo, which if you're metric impaired comes to $9.09 a pound. I really like mushrooms, so I guess that's why I have so many mushrooms. So when I'm overblessed, you're just gonna, it just splashes out on the people around me. These are so easy to grow. If you like mushrooms, there's no reason to ever be out of mushrooms. These grow on wheat straw. I buy it for $7.50 a bale, and I can make 20 of these with 2 bales of straw. I've been cultivating oyster mushrooms for about 15 years. I also grow shiitake and lychee. So I eat over 50 species of mushrooms. My favorite mushroom for foraging is matsutake. I think they're flavorful. They're hard enough to find that it's a real thrill when you do find them. Also, you're likely to come on a patch that has enough quantity to last you for a while, bring them home and process it. My very favorite mushroom for flavor is called the slime foliota. Its scientific name is Foliota namiko. It's marketed in Japan under the name namiko, which is Japanese for slimy. It's covered with a semi-transparent layer of gelatinous orange slime that stinks, which makes it kind of a problem for a cultivator to sell fresh. But I have to say, it is my favorite mushroom for flavor, and my favorite way to eat it is to slice it thin, put it on a soup, really, really hot, like boiling hot broth, and put those slices of that foliota on that soup, and the amount of time it takes for that soup to cool to where you can eat it is just the amount of time it takes to cook that. Oyster mushrooms are really easy to grow. These mushrooms are grown on barley straw. You can also use wheat straw, rice straw. What I do with it is I run it through a hammer mill to reduce the volume. I stuff it into a basket, and I put that basket, it just fits inside a 55-gallon drum. So I will put that basket of straw in that drum, submerge it in water, hold it at 160 to 180 degrees for at least 1 hour. It kills off the competition to the fungus, but it does not kill the heat-loving bacteria. That thermophilic bacteria is like baby food to the fungus. So by getting a colony of that growing in the straw and then chilling it to where it's still alive but it can't reproduce anymore because it's so cool, the fungus will run through, and the first thing it will eat is all those thermophilic bacteria. Once the straw is pasteurized, I spread it out on a table, inoculate it with grain spawn, which is millet with the fungus growing on it. I make my own grain spawn here on the mushroom farm. I have a clean room with a laminar flow hood, and I can clone mushrooms and make straw, or make grain spawn, or I can, if I acquire spawn from somebody else, I can expand it out into more spawn. Because mushrooms produce sexually, the offspring that come from the spores won't necessarily perform the way the parents do. So it makes way more sense for me to, if I have, like say, if I particularly like this mushroom, I would tear it open, and this tissue in here that's below the gills, in my clean room, I would take a little tiny fork that I'd flame sterilized. I'd tease some of that out and put it on agar on a petri dish, you know, like this one. This one's empty, but I have some in the lab and the fungus grows across the top of them. And then we cut up those little pieces of agar and put them in sterilized grain in order to make the grain master. We inoculated these yesterday, and you can't really see any sign. You see the grain there?
Right.
There's a little bit of kind of star shape, that mycelium trying to grow off into the straw. This is the first stage. We call this leaping off. Now, 14 days from here, on the 24th, I expect to be picking mushrooms off that kit. That mushroom will fruit 14 days after it's inoculated. This one, 16 days, the 475, the blue cap oyster mushrooms, takes about 24 days. I can grow shiitake on straw in 45 days. You see this kit, you can still see remnants of straw, but the fungus is growing to every bit of straw, and that's what happens before it starts fruiting. And then you'll see these little guys popping out. These will pin, and it doesn't take very long for them to get big enough to pick, 2 days maybe, and they'll look like this. When the margins begin to undulate, they're ready to pick. Undulate, go up and down.
When it starts getting wavy.
Yeah, these little ones, the margin is a straight line, and these ones that are ready to pick, the margins are going in and out and up and down. The next thing after they undulate is they spore, and when they sporulate, they millions and millions of spores. So unless you want to clean up this sort of stuff, it's nice to pick them after they undulate before they spore. But it's not necessary. They're still good after they spore. In fact, some of the mushrooms aren't really flavorful until they spore. Clean room. This is my lab. This is where I clone mushrooms. This is a tiny little 2-tine fork. That's my favorite tool for cloning. We would tease a little bit of tissue out of the mushroom and put it on the agar in there and let it grow across until it has colonized this agar like this. And we cut little cubes, little squares of that out and put it in sterilized grain. This is millet. I like to use millet because the kernels are small. Because they're small, I get more points of inoculation per unit weight than I do with rye or wheat. This is essential to a clean room. You need alcohol that's over 90% alcohol, and try to buy this during the COVID crisis. My sister-in-law works at the co-op where I probably wouldn't be able to get this. So we're in the clean room. This is the work area in my laminar flow hood. When I'm not using it, I keep this cover over the filter. And if you look in here, you see the filter has all these little aluminum channels that point this direction. That's what makes the laminar flow. As the air comes through that filter material, it aims it all this direction, so the wind is coming straight toward me. So when I'm working in here, I'll keep what I'm working on upwind from me, and I'll keep my hands downwind from that, and that filter will filter down to 0.1 microns, so not even a virus can get through there. So I've got this totally completely clean wind to work in, so I can open up like a bag of this and pour it into new grain to make an expansion, or I can clone a mushroom in there, or I can make the grain spawn from a petri dish in here. I recommend beginning growers don't do this. It takes up a whole room in my house. This equipment is very expensive. When I started this, you couldn't buy grain spawn. Now you can buy bags that are 4 times bigger than this for 20 bucks. These are how I keep my various cultures that I'm growing. And those are ready to expand onto grain. This is some grain spawn that I did a couple days ago. It hasn't started to grow onto the millet yet. Here's one that I did some time ago, and it's trying to fruit inside the bag because I didn't use it in a timely manner. So.
Very cool. Got all kinds of goodies.
Oh yeah, yeah. Here's some more spawn that's mature, ready to use.
How do you know when it's mature?
It turns white.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all white.
Huh. Wow. You got all these different. So this is all grain that's already been inoculated.
Yeah. This is a liquid inoculant. I don't normally use that.
So this will all eventually become bales that are growing mushrooms out here in your garage.
One of these will make 14 of those little kits, or 7 of the big ones. So yeah, it expands out quite well.
Oh.
This is my last crop of pinks. I won't grow them again until next June. I switched to cold temperature mushrooms like this in the wintertime. That way I don't have to heat nor cool my grow room. I just leave the window open.
Nice.
Don't make the most common mistake that beginning mushroom cultivators make. Growing shiitake on logs is wonderful if you live in Asia and your grandparents did it, because they know all the secrets. It's really difficult. I'm sure it could be done here. We have the same climate here as they do in northern Japan, and there's 200,000 farmers growing shiitake on logs there that they import from Siberia. We can grow them here on alder. So this would look like the very best way to do it. But if you don't have that background, there are things they know that we don't know yet. So my advice is grow a mushroom that's really easy to grow. Grow an oyster mushroom. Grow it on straw. Readily available, cheap. You get really good yields. I'll get 100% efficiency with this mushroom. After you've been growing these easy to grow mushrooms for a while, then try some of the little more difficult ones. Go to a Ganoderma or shiitake on wood chips or sawdust. Then if you can get that down and that's working real well for you, you want to inoculate some logs, try that. But don't start with growing shiitake on logs. That's like you sign up for a class to learn how to dive in the swimming pool. And you say, for my first dive, I want to do a double back flip off the high board. Well, you can try it, but probably not going to have real satisfying results. Start with a layout dive or jackknife, something easy that you can get well, and then go to the next harder one. And that's what I advise for people who are trying to grow mushrooms. If you want more information about our mushroom farm, our website is dietzfarm.com. That's spelled D-I-E-T-Z, farm.com.
So now we're gonna go on a walk in the forest. 30-minute walk, elapsed time. I'm gonna see what mushrooms I see on the side of the trail along the way, and we're gonna see if we can help identify them for you so that next time you go for a nature walk, you might see some mushrooms that you recognize. Today I'm carrying this bag. It's just a canvas grocery bag. I carry this because if I wanna put it in my backpack, that's fine. Some people get big cute baskets to carry. I'm a bag guy. The mushrooms can breathe in here and it's soft. And it can take a little bit of bouncing around if I'm really wanting to hike in the woods. But today we're just gonna look right trail side, see what we can see from the trail. So come with me on a walk. Let's go see what kind of mushrooms we can find in this forest. So right now I'm on the side of a pretty worn trail, and I have encountered what appears to be an Amanita Muscaria. This is a popular mushroom. Got those white spots that are so indicative of the Muscaria. It is the toadstool on Mario Brothers. So if I get it from deep below, now we can see the nature of an Amanita. It's got this vulva down here. It's a cup-like vulva on the bottom, and you can see the base of it has this sheath around it, and that was the universal veil. So it's like an egg that actually the mushroom pops out of, and this would be the shell that's remaining. Then you have a partial veil that's right here. This is where the cap margin separates from the stipe. If you look on top, all of those white spots are actually remnants of this universal veil down here. So it's an interesting mushroom. It's really beautiful. You can see the gills under there. And this is known to be a toxic species. Some cultures have prepared it in a way that it becomes a hypnotic, but it is not recommended. Still, very identifiable, very beautiful mushroom. This is the Amanita Muscaria. And this one is a little bit more yellow. They often get dark red. So here's an interesting mushroom, a relative of Amanita Muscaria. Right here we have an Amanita Pantherina, and this is a full-grown Amanita Pantherina, also toxic. Another indicator of this mushroom is the veil remnants that are on the cap. You can see some right here. Those used to be white spots when it was really young. Another toxic version of an Amanita, and they do grow around here, so avoid this one. It's brown with white spots, Amanita Pantherina. And let's keep moving. So it looks like, so right here, this is a type of Russella. How I can tell it's a Russella is when I go to break the stem, it's gonna break easy like chalk. And that's indicative of a Russella mushroom. The cell structure of these is so that the stem breaks like chalk. It's very interesting. It doesn't bend and it doesn't string off like a chanterelle might. So here I am, just a little bit in the brush, and I found this. And a lot of people see these and they think, is that a bolete? And it actually is a form of bolete. It's called a Swillus. This is commonly known as the slippery jack. It's a pretty mushroom, and they get really big and they get awfully contorted. This particular specimen, pretty symmetrical, and they call it a slippery jack. It's got this membranous slimy layer on top. And if you look, you can see how the margin is very thin and it kind of wraps under. That's pretty indicative of a Swillus mushroom. These are said to be edible, not necessarily the most desirable. You usually see big clusters of these. Swillus luteus. So if you're ever walking in the woods and you see this weird globby thing growing on the end of a log, this one actually has some of this drips of it looks like dew on it. This is called Guttation. This is actually a young specimen of the Red Belted Conch, and they make these weird globular looking things on the ends of the log. So they can look pretty different from specimen to specimen. But when it's growing here on the end of a log in this kind of area, I would suggest that it's probably the Hypomices Lactoflorum, which has recently been renamed, and I can't think of the name right now. So look at what I just found here. This is known as Turbinellis Glocosis, or the scaly base, or the scaly chanterelle. It is considered to be toxic here in the Pacific Northwest. People confuse them for the chanterelle. Some people call it a false chanterelle. Technically, everything that isn't a chanterelle is a false chanterelle. But if you look, it does look a little bit like a chanterelle. So be careful when you're out picking. These are known to be toxic. Cool find though. Ta-da! Beautiful golden chanterelle. And if you look around this area, if you look around the area where you find the chanterelle, you can see a baby button here, another one right there. This one happens to be a really interesting find because this was cut a couple weeks ago, but look, new buttons are starting to grow off of the same stump. So I've heard of this happening, but I never really believed it. It just sounds like some kind of folklore. But it really does happen sometimes, I guess. So if you do cut it, there is a chance that this might happen. So how about that? We're on our hike and I look down to the side and this is an interesting find. It is a red-capped Lacinum. This is a Lacinum species, and if you look underneath, it's also got a sponge. It's got a pore surface underneath, and that is indicative of a mushroom in the bolete family. These red-capped ones I've heard will make you sick, and so we're not going to eat that today. If you look at all of this reticulation on the stalk, that is indicative of the Lacinum, and they get really, really big. You can see this is like as big as my head. So, fun mushroom. Right here we've came across a pretty cool one. Very, very stout little mushroom. Look at this little guy. Super thick, very sturdy. This is known as a Bolitas Fibrilosis. Some people call it the Fib King. And it's got this very kind of fuzzy cap on it. It's got a really kind of fuzzy cap and a lot of this reticulation on the stipe. That means these little fuzz and whatnot. I hear they're good eating. So I think this one makes it in our basket today, and we're gonna take it home to cook. Try it out. So that was a 30-minute walk in the woods. We saw 7 or 8 types of mushrooms, maybe more than that, I lost track. But what an amazing time to be in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Right now, mid-October, this is the time to be out here discovering mushrooms. So go discover mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest. Thanks for following us on our journey. Have a good one.